Today we are going to look at the rise of Nazism and the phenomenon of Nazism that controlled Germany between 33 and 45, and the Second World War that many would argue had been caused by the Nazi policies. It happened between, let us say, 1919 and 33 when they finally came to power. And the immediate context of post-war Germany is obviously the war. The war had devastated Germany socially, economically, and politically. The German Empire collapsed. In its place came a new republic which was seeking to find its feet. For the first time, Germany became a republic, and the Kaiser had to move out of Germany. And it is then that the Germans, some of the, particularly the war veterans, they developed a theory of Dolchstoß legend, which literally meant a stab in the back. They believed that Germany had not lost the war, and in fact it was a stab in the back by the Social Democrats. In 1919, Anton Drexler, Dietrich Eckart, and Karl Harrer founded the German Workers' Party. Hitler joined this party as the seventh member. Adolf Hitler, who had worked in the army for some time, was born in 1889, was a failed artist, and somehow now imagined himself as a politician. He joined this later, but in 1920, this party was renamed as the Nationalsozialist Deutsche Arbeiter Party, meaning National Socialist German Workers' Party, in short NSDAP. As early as 1923, he staged a push or an attempt to capture power in a Munich beer hall, and predictably it failed. Hitler was put behind the prison, and it is here that Hitler developed his ideas, put the broad outline of his foreign policy, and generally put forward in the public domain his racist ideas at the same time.
What was the social base of this Nazi support?
You see, they started in Bavaria. Bavaria had separatist tendencies. In Germany, there had been a whole lot of political problems, including separatist movements. Bavaria wanted to secede from Germany and create a separate state altogether. So, and Hitler was from Austria really, and it is in Bavaria that he set up his base. It is only after he had come out of the prison, wrote the Mein Kampf, that he increasingly became aware that this was a very narrow basis for the Nazis to operate upon. For example, to begin with, their supporters came from these war veterans, the people who believed in the Dolchstoß legend, the unemployed youth, because they put the entire blame for their utter misery on the war, the defeat, and the ineptitude of the politicians. Now, they were, everyone was looking for radical solutions. The KPD or the Communist Party provided the radical solution, or seeking to provide the radical solution on the left, and the Nazis filled in the vacuum to the right. In between there were centrist parties, including Social Democrats on the left, or DNVP and DVP, etc. Now, at this point of time, Hitler was seeking to expand the social base and also the territorial operational areas of the Nazis. So they were moving north. It is here that Otto and Gregor Strasser, the two brothers, helped Hitler greatly in first trying to bring in the working class, then the business classes, and to secure even money from them. There was the old middle class, Alt-Mittelstand as the Germans called them. But later, as the Sturmabteilung or the stormtroopers came in, they were unleashing terror, and the workers were also willy-nilly joining the Nazis. So the social base, which was very narrow to begin with, extended, and they also had support from the capitalist classes who felt that they might come in very handy in tackling the trade union movement and the working class. Now, the Weimar Republic, particularly under Gustav Stresemann, who was foreign minister for a long time, had managed to find their feet ultimately. There had been some reconciliation, some economic recovery for Germany, but Gustav Stresemann died in 1929. Germany had been made a member of the League of Nations. Germany was once again recognized as a great power in Europe. But what happened was that the Great Depression, economic depression of 1929-30, again was a severe setback for Germany. It is at this point that radical solutions seem to be the only option. It became very popular. And between 1929 and 33, you see the spectacular rise of the Nazis. From 2 in the Reichstag, 2 members in the parliament, to 232, it was single largest party. The President Hindenburg asked Hitler to form a government as the leader of the largest single party in the Reichstag in January 1933, and the Nazis came to power very democratically. There was no coup d'etat, no forcible seizure of power, but as the single largest party in the parliament. The years from 30 to 32 has often been described as the street fighting years, when the Sturmabteilung, or the stormtroopers under Ernst Röhm, had really played havoc amongst all the opponents of the Nazis. Hitler ultimately established a dictatorial regime, and he lost his power only after the final defeat in the war, when he committed suicide in his bunker in Berlin. Now, Hitler obviously came to power democratically, as we have seen. He took advantage of the division of his opposition. Hitler was determined to stamp out all opposition. He took advantage of a mysterious fire in the Reichstag on 27th of February, blamed the communists for the fire, and then unleashed his stormtroopers and unleashed a veritable regime of terror and repression on all the opposition, particularly on the communists. In March came the enabling laws, and the enabling laws actually led to the imposition of what has been described as Gleichschaltung, or coordination.
So, can you explain a bit, what is this Gleichschaltung?
Yes, the Gleichschaltung was actually coordinating all the Germans under one ideology of the Nazis. As has been said, that everything from a bowling club to beekeeping was sought to be brought under the control of the Nazis. This is the way a totalitarian state and a totalitarian party at a level was being constructed. That the state would be under the party would be under the Führer. That's how Hitler came to be known, Führer, as the leader, the supreme leader. This is what the kind of Germany they created through the 1930s. Now, the National Socialist Development Department, it was a party department, and what they tried to do is to bring the state offices under the control of the party offices. The party departments would become the supreme one. And this department dealt with racist policies, culture, agriculture, even internal affairs. And this was the kind of coordination that they were seeking. But some historians doubt if they really constructed a monolithic state. It was totalitarian, but was it really monolithic? They said there were different centers of pull within the party, within the state as well. Hitler himself said this in 1930. He said, I'm quoting him, quote, "Once we possess constitutional power, we will mold the state into the shape we hold suitable," unquote. So that is the kind of state that they were seeking to mold now. Hitler had been talking about from the beginning about the racial superiority of the Nordic races, the Germans, and how it was imperative to preserve their racial superiority. Therefore, it started in the anti-Jewish policies that they had.
Sir, how did the people of Germany respond to Hitler's anti-Semitism?
Well, there had been a great deal of anxiety amongst the Jews, the left-wing people, but there were many who probably found some support for the anti-Jewish policies because the lower middle class, the middle class, because the business, the finances had been largely under the control of the Jews. It was late before they realized that it was not to favor the Germans, the non-Jewish Germans, that the policy was adopted, that it was to be a racist policy, but it was too late. Now the laws were suitably modified. They were trying to organize everything by the Nazis, and for example, the trade unions were out. There was only labor front that the Nazis controlled. The entire agriculture was to be brought under Walter Dauer's national food estate. Hitler also tried to keep his control over the Nazis absolute. What he did was known as the Night of Long Lives. In the essay, the leader was murdered. It was a result of the machinations of Hitler himself. Goebbels was in charge of propaganda, film, radio, press, literature, everything, with the various art forms, all were under his control, and through relentless propaganda and lies, he tried to establish Nazi ideology. There was the Hitler Youth, where all youth must go. There was a League for Young Girls, where all girls must go. There would be the youth must join the compulsory labor service. And by 1935, universal military service or conscription was introduced. And everywhere you find the Nazi apparatus actually controlling everything. And they did succeed in solving the economic crisis in the short run, but the way they solved it was beset with such tremendous implications that it overheated the economy and actually made war almost unavoidable. But in the short term, this is why what made the people happy. And later, the economy, the rearmament and the military implications of the economic reorganization was absolutely transparent. And what had started as guns and butter, guns for the army, butter for the people, later became gun for butter. That you privilege gun over butter, and therefore the illusion of social welfare was gone ultimately. Hitler was not only against the Jews, but the gypsies. There had been persecution from the beginning, starting with the small businesses, the Jews in the neighborhood area. A final assault came in 1938 in what is known as the Crystal Night. More than 200 Jewish synagogues were destroyed. 7,500 shops and business establishments were destroyed. 91 Jews were murdered and 26,000 Jews were arrested. This was not enough. After the war had started, they evolved the final solution, which it resulted in the decimation of more than 6 million Jews. This is how then the Nazi state was constructed by the Nazis and Hitler in the 1930s. It was in his autobiography, Mein Kampf, that Hitler first outlined the foreign policy that he might follow later. He wanted the revision of the Treaty of Versailles. He adopted an anti-Bolshevik stance. And more significantly, he talked of the need for Lebensraum, or living space, that the Germans needed to preserve the purity of their race and indeed to have enough living space, as he detailed it.
Sir, how relevant was this? Did he really anticipate the actual foreign policy?
Well, the historians have doubted this. Many thought that Mein Kampf was rantings of a man, is kind of daydreaming of a man. But he certainly gave certain ideas, including that of Lebensraum, which many historians have found very relevant in understanding his foreign policy. Germany needed to expand, and that was very important. You see, during the Weimar Republic, Stresemann also wanted revision of the Versailles Treaty. This was known as revisionism. But Stresemann wanted to do it through reconciliation, through economic reconstruction, and cooperation and credit from the international community. Hitler obviously did not follow Stresemann, and there was, we have seen, a second problem after the Great Economic Depression, and there was a renewed economic crisis that was the kind of backdrop in which Hitler came to power. Now, Hitler wanted to follow a radical policy from the beginning. Indeed, he thought that international politics was like a permanent struggle, including in the final analysis, war. Now, from 1930, he had often spoken of German world domination. Quote, political power was to be used later, perhaps to win new export possibilities, perhaps and probably better, to conquer new Lebensraum in the East and carry out its ruthless Germanization. So, in this it was clear that Hitler intended to pursue an expansionist policy. It would be mainly in the East, at the cost of what he constructed to be the inferior Slavic people, Ukraine, Russia, and southeastern Europe. This is in consonance with the older German ideal of Drang nach Osten, the pull towards the East. It was there even in the 19th century under Kaiser William II. But to begin with, Hitler did not wish to project an aggressive image. He would follow conciliation. He said he wanted to prepare politically, militarily, economically before he could launch the war ultimately. So it was peaceful image that he wanted to project, but at the same time, he was very clear in, for example, withdrawing Germany successively from the World Economic Conference, World Disarmament Conference, and finally the League of Nations, which Stresemann had taken so much care to admit Germany into. So it was clear that he was sending notice to them. At the same time, in 1934, he signed a non-aggression pact with Poland. Initially, he wanted to project this. It is from 35 onwards, particularly 36, that the aggressive intentions were becoming very clear. In 35, he introduced compulsory conscription, universal military service. Germany was permitted by Versailles to have only an army of 1 lakh and no air force at all, very few ships. Now, Germany announces it has an air force. Obviously, the army was a lot more than 100,000. From here, you have the gradual escalation. In 1936, he remilitarized Rhineland. This was against the Treaty of Versailles, and he was also testing ground, because when he remilitarized Rhineland, nobody took any notice, and France, even though the generals wanted strong action, the French politicians did not dare take on Hitler. In 1936, he adopted the 4-year plan. This 4-year plan was adopted to give Germany autarky of self-sufficiency, and in the opinion of some historians, German foreign policy after this was virtually conducted on lines of a war economy.
Sir, what is this war economy, and how did this war economy make an aggressive foreign policy unavoidable for Hitler?
This 4-year plan and the way German economy was being organized had been described by some historians like Richard Overy as the war economy. Germany tried to solve the economic crisis by massive state funding. This state funding initially was only for roads, bridges, construction of houses, etc. But later they started building army barracks, ports, harbor expansion, airports. The military purpose of later activities, state funding, was very clear. Secondly, with this was the massive policy of rearmament. The army was being enlarged, armaments production was being speeded up. Now all these needed money. 17.7% of the amount they spent as late as 1937 came from the taxpayers' money. As the economy was being overheated, Germany needed new areas for raw material, for market of German products. And you see, increasingly there were the aggressive trade policy. Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and later even the Scandinavian countries. These countries, the 80% of their imports in cases had been from Germany. And it is from this point that you see Germany switch on the offensive mode. In 1936 came Rome-Berlin Axis. In the meantime, General Franco had strengthened the Republican Party in government in Spain. There was a civil war. Hitler and Mussolini supported Franco. Germany economically benefited from that. Germany and Italy came together. Later, in 1937, Germany and Japan concluded the Anti-Comintern Pact, to which Italy acceded later, and it became the Rome-Berlin-Tokyo axis. And from 1938, there was aggression. He had attempted invasion of Austria in 1934, failed. In 1938, first it was Austria. Then came Czechoslovakia. He wanted Sudetenland given to the Czechs by the Treaty of Versailles. There were many Germans there. At the initiative of Mussolini, there was the Munich Conference where they divided Czechoslovakia, but it was not enough. In March 1935, Hitler took Czechoslovakia. In August, he concluded the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact with Stalin and therefore neutralized Russia for the time being. After the conclusion of the Nazi-Soviet pact, Hitler felt free from having to fight a war on two fronts, in the East and the West. Therefore, he decided now to take on Poland, and on 1st September 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. Now, Britain and France had so far been following the policy of appeasement. Now, Britain decided that enough was enough, and the British Prime Minister declared in the Parliament that this country is at war with Germany. France followed, and the Second World War started. Immediately after the war, with 6 million Jews being decimated, such a devastation around the world, it was very easy, particularly in the context of Germany's final defeat, it was easy to apportion the blame entirely at the door of Hitler. That here was a wicked man. This man, through his insane policies, had disturbed the balance of power politics in the world and caused the Second World War, bringing in such devastation and killing millions of men. This was lent a distinction by many significant historians like Sir Lewis Namier, John Wheeler Bennett, etc. They tried to unfold the tragic circumstances leading to the war, but the focus generally was on Hitler's personal responsibility. The bubble, as it were, was burst in 1961 by A.J.P. Taylor. By then, the old records were coming into the public. Historians had access to the archival records relating to the 1930s at least. And Taylor first said in his Origins of the Second World War that Hitler was no more or no less wicked than other politicians. That German foreign policy was not really Hitler's. It was the work of the diplomats, the professional foreign policy specialists, as much as it had been Hitler's. Moreover, he detected there was a continuity in German foreign policy from the establishment of the Second Reich in 1871. And therefore, it would not be right to apportion the blame on Hitler. He said it was not that Hitler deliberately brought about the war, but that the world blundered into a war. It was the result of a series of blunders rather than the consequence of deliberate and intentional war that Hitler had caused.
How significant was A.J.P. Taylor's intervention?
Taylor had risked his reputation, as Hugh Trevor Roper wrote in his rejoinder, that I suspect that Mr. Taylor is risking his reputation, but not really. Even 25 years later, in 1986, a book was brought, and there had been more volumes on how the A.J.P. Taylor thesis stands across the divide of 25 years. And after this, we have a whole series of historians writing on this, asking very more relevant questions, not just presuming the essential guilt of Hitler. And then we have a very rich historiography indeed. Now, we can divide them into two different groups. One group argued that they've been called the intentionalists, that Hitler deliberately and intentionally caused a war. As against this, there is the other school which we would call the structuralist or functionalist school. The structuralist or a functionalist school would argue that the problem was in the structure. Problem was in the function of the structure that had been created. They said that the policy decisions were determined by the functioning of the principal elements of the system, that is, the structure that was created. William II in the 19th century had talked of a Mitteleuropa, a German dominated hegemonic Central European bloc. That's what Hitler was looking for now. Incorporate, after the war had started, this is the direction that he took. He took Southeastern European countries, he moved towards Ukraine and then Russia, he took Poland, and in the Scandinavian countries, he needed the Swedish iron ore and petroleum from Romania, bauxite from Bulgaria, and that's how he was moving. So they would argue that a structuralist point of view, that there's something wrong with the structure. This is something that Fritz Fischer, a very, very prominent historian, had talked about in the context of the First World War. In England, Alan Bullock had written on Hitler, and he believed that Hitler had this plan of domination of Europe. German historians like Everhard Jäckel and Dietrich Egner supported that. And later we have others like Hans Mommsen, Martin Brossart, in Germany, Karl Dietrich, then Tim Masson. There were many other historians. I'm just summing up the two schools. At a level, you see, the debate continues. Every year, new books, several of them are published on the causes of the Second World War, on Hitler, and we have simply tried to understand what was happening and a very brief overview of that.